Hello, welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Ceiling Hero, released in 1940. It's the 298th in the series, and it is directed by Tex Avery. At the time of this recording, it's not available on physical media just yet, although that may change later on, and I'll update this review in the comments below if there is a physical media release, because as you can see, it's been restored, it's ready to go, it just needs to go on a disc. It won't be on YouTube unless Warner Brothers chooses to put this on their own channel, as it is under copyright, and one of the gags might give them a bit of a pause on that, and I'll go through that in a moment. But in case you haven't seen this one, not really much to say by way of a synopsis. It's your typical spot gag short by Tex Avery, who had done many of these by this point, and this time round, it's all about pilots, airplanes, and so on. And we'll definitely go through each and every gag like I have with these previous spot gag shorts. In terms of trivia, I will go through things as we go along each spot gag, but the title itself, and this is very interesting, it's a play on the 1936 film title Ceiling Zero, directed by Howard Hawks, starring James Cagney and Pat O'Brien. And it's a movie I actually have seen from that period of time. I've seen a lot of old movies, but for whatever reason, a few of them I haven't seen that are referenced by Warner Brothers, so I definitely need to check those out. But this one I have seen, it's a really good film. I mean, pretty much anything by Howard Hawks, definitely give it a go. Now, what's interesting though is that most of the puns in Looney Tunes shorts, when it comes to the title, they'll just do a punny sort of title, but that's it. That's the only thing that's shared between the short and the film title that they're parodying. Here though, Ceiling Zero actually has a plane theme. You have James Cagney playing a pilot, and you have Pat O'Brien playing a manager of an airline company. And the title itself, Ceiling Zero, also refers to a plane term when you're flying in the air, the clouds are so thick you can't navigate. And remember, when that film came out, radar wasn't really a thing, so to speak. It was in development. Technologies were out there, but not in planes, at least not as we have it today, where they can fly through clouds and still know where they are. It would be after World War II, where it was more developed and used, and then afterwards it'd be put on planes and such. And I know I'm simplifying things, but that should give you guys a general idea here. So what we're going to do is look at this short from start to finish, go through each and every gag. I was actually considering doing some sort of a dad gag meter, because we all know these Tex Avery shorts are full of dad gags, but no, we'll go through each and every one and I'll let you know how I feel about them. And of course, as always, if you agree, disagree, whatever, let me know in the comments below. But what's interesting about this new restoration, the short itself looks really good. But I wonder if there was this Photoshop manipulation, because you've got the title cards, which thankfully they are here, but around the borders, it looks like that effect that you can do on Photoshop. The previous available version of this short actually had this blue borders around, and I'm not sure about the history of that. So if you have any further information about it, let me know in the comments. But it looks as though someone's gone in and done this fancy trick, and that's that. Or maybe it was like that, but I highly doubt it. When it comes to the music, I will have my usual thing showing what musical cues are played, and believe me, there's a ton of them in this one. But what you hear in the beginning is Parade of the Animals, which is an interesting choice, and yet it definitely works, because it's sort of a parade, isn't it, of all these planes that you'll see in one of the very first few shots. But there are 17 musical cues in this short, so there's quite a lot of them. So definitely Carl Starling's gone to town on this one. And you'll definitely hear a few fan favorites as well, plus a few interesting choices as well. So I'll point out a few, but I will have everything showing in a graphic anyway. But manipulation aside, in terms of photoshopping or whatever in the title card, I do like that effect of that plane just going past. So Avery would, in a few of his shorts, make title cards that are more or less interactive. So you even have later on in the Bugs Bunny short, The Tortoise Beats the Hare, where you have Bugs Bunny walking on and he's reading the actual credits off of the cards. Here it's a similar sort of thing, so I wonder if Avery liked the idea here and then just decided to take the next step in that Bugs Bunny short. So we start off with that beautiful shot of all those planes going, and of course we hear once again Robert C. Bruce doing his usual narrator role in these shorts. I mean, sometimes you'll hear somebody else, but more often than not, it's Robert C. Bruce. But we have Avery, who's pretty confident in doing these sorts of things by this point, because he's done so many. So he sets everything up in a relatively serious fashion before going to town with all the gags.
Here we are at a large Midwestern airport.
Now, it's interesting placing this short in context, because it's come after a wild hare. So you had that massively successful short, which is a narrative short. But I wonder if that took a lot out of him because he now goes back to the tried and true spot gag short, because these would have been quick to make. These would sometimes even consist of gags which they might have thought of for another short, it got cut for whatever reason, but then they just put it in a spot gag short as a one-off thing. So I'm wondering if just Tex Avery put a lot into Wild Hare that he just needed to do a quick short to either get back on schedule or just recover from any sort of exhaustion or whatever. And I like the fact that we start off that we're at a large Midwestern airport, which if you've been to large airports these days, this would definitely pale in comparison. But I guess back then, this would have been considered fairly large. But it's interesting that it's not really a massive gag per se, but if you look at the planes, how they're almost going to collide into each other, well, yeah, definitely planes wouldn't be allowed to fly in that fashion, and even back then, but hey, they also didn't have radar either, so it would have more or less been done by sight. But in any case, we see our first gag, and we get a wonderful dad joke. So, as Robert C. Bruce explains, each new pilot needs to have a license, which makes sense, but they refer to it here as a license plate.
Every man flying a plane must be a licensed pilot. Here's a flyer who has just received his license.
Ha ha. 6 7/8, which comes across like that Three Stooges joke regarding the union they're part of. But in any case, it's a weak gag, but it makes me chuckle because of how stupid it is. Yeah, it might be a weak gag, but I do like the fact that they seem to acknowledge that it's a weak gag because you hear that little car horn at the very end of it. But whatever. We're on to the next gag, where we see a plane that says TJA on it. Now, in this restoration, you'll notice that there is 2 layers here. So you have the wings, you got the plane there, so I guess that kind of gives away what's going to happen, but it's still pretty funny regardless. So you have Robert C. Bruce going on about this new 6-engine plane ready for takeoff, and what takes off?
One of the latest innovations in transports is this huge 6-motored airliner. Let's watch the takeoff.
The wings, because of course it does. But I do like the timing of those passengers as they all stick their heads out in disbelief going, what's going on? Although I'm not sure why the windows are open in the first place, but hey, it's a cartoon, right? Now the next gag, of course, we even hear a little thing at the end saying you're a horse's ass, because why not, in terms of a musical cue, but we see that the tire is massive compared to the actual mechanic, but we pan up and we see that the plane is incredibly small.
In designing the modern plane, the larger the tire, the smoother the landing. Notice this giant tire in comparison to the mechanic.
No idea what on earth this kind of plane is, but hey, maybe chuckle. You know what? That's the main thing, right? But on to the next gag. Now we see an experimental rocket ship. Remember, this was released in 1940, and this would be made earlier on, so in 1939. So rocket ships, aside from sci-fi novels, weren't really a thing. So, of course, a lot of cartoons will have gags revolving around this sort of thing, and it's definitely appropriate here. It's a silly little thing. The rocket goes off. We can see some beautiful special effects, which now pop in this restoration. And we do get a little twist, though, because you would expect Eat at Joe's, which you've seen quite a lot, but no, we see another one, Eat Tony's Hot Dogs. So that's that, I guess. But on to the next one. The next gag is a quick one where it's about how popular air travel is becoming. But to put that into context, back then, plane rides were incredibly expensive. Yes, I know they're expensive now, but plane rides between cities in the same country and that sort of thing are relatively cheap compared to what people were paying for back in the day. And trains were still the main mode of transportation between towns in the vast majority of the world, and then later on cars as well. Plane travel would eventually become cheaper. It's kind of quaint to see this sort of a gag because now you see a lot of families going on holidays, but then you see this one as being like your typical upper middle class who can afford to have a car type family, and they even have a little camper van that's towed at the end, and they're just putting it in the sky. Is it ha-ha funny? Not really, but it's interesting to see that in the context of when this short came out. So we get a nice little silly gag for something that is kind of still done today, whether it's by skywriting or maybe even blimps in the air, that sort of thing, and that's advertising, which makes sense. So we see that we have a complete dinner, and that dinner cost 50 cents, and I've run this through the inflation calculator, so 50 cents in 1940 would be about $12 or so American today, and 5 cents For the extra pie would be, of course, a little bit less than that, but they'll give you a rough idea of how much things cost, and that would sound about right for a dinner, I suppose. But in any case, as a gag, again, it's fine. People would have gotten probably more of a chuckle over this since air travel was way more of a novelty at that point in time. So there's that. And we get a very brief gag, a cabin cruiser with a literal cabin, ha ha, of course. Now there were planes at the time that were known as cruisers, and they had like a cabin interiors, so they were referred to as cabin cruisers. And I know cabin cruisers are also referred to ships as well, but either way, it's just your silly little pun, of course. Now remember how I was alluding to before that this short may not appear on Warner Brothers YouTube channels if they want to put it on? Well, the next gag should be pretty explanatory. We see the China Clipper with an airplane design that should be pretty apparent that it wouldn't be very suitable today. But also, that was actually a real plane, and it was a plane that went from San Francisco to Manila, and they just took the name and decided to make a Chinese pun on it, so there's that. Now, the next gag, you know what to expect, even how the shot is staged, where you see the two heads of the pilots, and Robert C. Bruce is talking about the next stage of camouflage, and this would have been fun for the animator to do. It's like, hey, it's a nice simple shot. It's going to animate a few heads, and that's pretty much it. I can go to lunch a lot earlier today, or something.
Perfected the art of camouflage to protect their combat planes from enemy eyes. Here's an excellent example of camouflage.
In any case, you know what to expect there. I chuckled. I knew what was coming, but whatever. We move on. So we now see a pilot that's in trouble, and keep in mind, because airplanes were still relatively new technology, they'd only been around for a couple of decades, at least in this kind of capacity. As you can imagine, things were constantly still being refined and improved, and this was not exactly an infallible technology. But in any case, they've addressed it here, and the pilot rightly has a parachute, which ends up doing the wonderful little pun, good to the last drop. In case you're wondering what that is a coffee slogan at the time. And specifically, that was the Maxwell House Coffee, and they used that slogan to advertise their coffee. And you can imagine other coffee houses would have tried to use that kind of a slogan because it's a good one, it really is. But the pilot lands, and it's not really fast paced here. I've definitely noticed that. And this is unlike what Avery would do later, when a lot of these sort of spot gag shorts will be a lot more faster paced. But here it takes a little bit longer because you see that the pilot's landed. I'd say Avery was just building up a moment of, okay, what's the gag here? What's going to happen? But sure enough, the pilot's landed all safely. He looks up and he sees that billboard. Next time, try the train. Because as I mentioned before, train was the main mode of transportation between major towns. Because even cars at the time, sure, they could travel between towns, but if we're talking about major cross-country journeys, it still wasn't suitable. It'd be after World War II where things would pick up and freeways would be built and that sort of thing. And yes, of course, the Southern Atlantic was actually a railroad at the time. And of cherry on top, we hear California, Here I Come, because just about any time you hear a railroad reference, you're going to hear that theme. But on to the next gag, which involves a passenger plane taking off and what actually happens. And we see a whole bunch of gags associated with it. So first of all, we see the gag that Avery would revisit later on when he's over at MGM, is that the plane's approaching some buildings, and the buildings just quickly crash down in a wonderful bit of timing. And we get the typical stop-go thing. I mean, we've seen this a million times, but it's still pretty funny. We all know that the plane that's going to be crossing will be something small, and sure enough, it is. Although with the stop-go section, there is a little, I don't know if we call it an animation error or something, but as it's traveling through, it actually clips through the go sign. So it looks like something that was just done and they couldn't really go back and fix it. I mean, it's not a big deal. It was just something I realized, hang on a moment, they didn't quite align that shot, but whatever, we move on. So Robert C. Bruce mentions that if there's something with the equipment on board, they just follow the well-known highways. So you get a few minor gags here. The plane's following along, and for some weird reason, even though it's a shadow, he still has to move out of the way for another car. I don't know why, but anyway. And as you'd expect, the plane at the fork in the road goes one way, realizes it's going the wrong way, and just goes back. Why the plane would do this? It's silly. Whatever. We move on to the next gag. In this gag, we see a lot of wonderful special effects, so the effects animators would have worked overtime in this shot, but we see that the plane is riding through the storm, and we see a silly little gag where we see the pilot, who has a resemblance of actor Randolph Scott. In fact, a lot of these pilots that you see in this short would have come from various film projects that they would have seen maybe in the film posters or in movies that they actually saw. So, yeah, this one seems to come across as like a Randolph Scott type person, but anyway. Get a silly gag is wiping the windscreen with his hands. Makes no sense. And we see a gag that Avery himself used a few times and other directors, where as soon as you cross the California state line, this arbitrary line, the weather magically turns really nice.
We are now approaching the California state line.
And I guess it's probably more funnier if you actually live in California, but at least he got out of the storm, and that's the main thing. But on to the next gag. And the next gag involves stunt pilots, and this is definitely an interesting gag. I don't think I've seen Avery do something like this before, and it showed that even in shorts like this, where a lot of the gags, yeah, you've seen before, or even if you hadn't, this isn't perhaps his best spot gag short, but then you got moments like this that make up for it. So they end up tying themselves in some sort of a knot and end up getting stuck. Very surreal. I think it's very clever. But on to the next one, where we see experienced pilots must master the art of blind flying. As soon as you hear that, come on. Before even watching this gag, what do you think's going to happen? We all know, okay? Now it's just about the execution. But with how it's set up, though, you think it's going to take itself seriously, where the pilot covers up aircraft so he can, blind fly, but then as he's about to land, he takes out a cane to check for the ground.
Experienced pilots must master the art of blind flying. Let's watch this blind landing.
Okay, sure. Again, we knew what to expect. I chuckled over it. It's fine for what it is. And the next gag goes on pretty quickly, where you see that the plane's doing all these loop-de-loops, and as you'd expect, when the pilot gets out, he's going to do a few loop-de-loops as well. Again, it's fine for what it is. This might be more funnier for someone who maybe hasn't seen a Tex Avery short and doesn't know what to expect, but then sometimes when you watch too many of these, it can be pretty tricky to muster up much enthusiasm, but it's okay. It's fine. I don't hate that gag, but I think I've probably just seen it too many times. But on to the next one, which, much like before when we saw the passenger jet going through the buildings and so on, it's a whole bunch of mini gags involving within one major one, and it involves a test pilot testing a plane, of course. Now, when you hear the pilot calling Barranca, that's a reference that comes from Only Angels Have Wings, which was actually a fairly recent film to when this short was made, because this would have been in production in 1939, and that film came out in 1939, so that would have been a very topical thing, and audiences would have been very familiar with the film, or at least know of it. But I gotta say, I love the design of this pilot. And yes, these days, you would not be smoking in an airfield, because everything around you is just about flammable, but I just love the look of this pilot anyway, just how he's got that confident look about him that, yep, being a test pilot may be dangerous, but I'm not afraid. And he turns around, and we got another film reference there, test pilot from the picture of the same name, and yes, indeed, 1938, had a film named Test Pilot that had Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy in it. I haven't seen that one. If you have, let me know what you think of it. And the cherry on top with that gag is that you hear the cue, "You ought to be in pictures." Again, there were so many cues in this one, and yet Carl Starling still did a very good job with that. But in this scene, Avery plays it pretty straight. It just goes on, right? And we even hear Aloha Oi, which, look, which is another musical pun. But overall, though, aside from those movie references, it's done pretty straightforward. And we know that Avery's going to be building to something incredible. And speaking of incredible, again, this restoration's amazing. You can see a lot of the brush strokes that were done in the background with all the clouds as well. It's fantastic. So we see the test pilot going up, and we even see this balloon with a sign saying "Good Rumor, 200 feet ahead." Is that a reference to Good Humor ice cream? If I got that wrong, definitely let me know in the comments below, but I feel as though, because it's going so high up, given that there's snow, that's what it's referencing to, but if I'm wrong, let me know. But then we cut to inside. Now, why is there a payphone here? That is so ridiculous. And again, Avery treats it straight, like it's normal to have a payphone inside a plane like this. It's also normal not to have an oxygen mask either, apparently, but anyway. And the cherry on top with the payphone is that the pilot has to also pay to use that phone, which makes it even funnier. So after the pilot calls Barranca, he ends off giving off some information, including some sports scores for whatever reason, right?
Altitude 16, longitude 19, airspeed 35, oil pressure 21, USC 14, Tennessee nothing.
But we see that the plane goes up and up and up, and we even see a gag, which again, Avery did use before, and a lot of other directors would have used before, because there's an obvious one, which is the Los Angeles city limits gag, which at the time, Los Angeles was expanding outward to the point where, in this case, it's just pointing out that it's just so ridiculous that it's expanding even upwards, apparently. But I like how the tension is building up, because you know there's going to be a major punchline at the end of this. I mean, there pretty much has to be, right? Why else would he be building things up the way he is? So we get cuts between the pilot and what's happening outside, and even to the speedometer, which has to have an extra amount of zeros at the end, because of course it does. But we got that beautiful painted background, which includes the plane, in this case, being all frozen over, and somehow there's a polar bear on there, which is the only animated bit. And this is why these spot gag cartoons were so easy to make, because Avery could do these little shortcuts and get things done a lot quicker. But now we have some engine trouble. Clearly the pilot's gone too high, so now we build up even more tension amongst the beautiful backgrounds once again, as the plane now goes down, and we're going to see what on earth is this pilot going to do to get out of trouble. So the pilot tries to level out his plane to no use, and we get another wonderful background of our viewpoint of how close we are getting to the ground, which this restoration makes pop even more. So he calls Barranca once again, saying, "I wish to report an accident." But I like how he's test pilot 13, because of course he is, clearly being a very lucky pilot, and we see that his gauge shows that he's going to go to 1 foot. But the timing of that impact at the very end is hilarious. Just the way it drops to the ground definitely gave me a major chuckle there. And we see that the ambulances approach, and we to see what's at this wreckage. Then we hear Robert C. Bruce being all dramatic, saying, "Is he hurt? Is he killed?" Even though we can clearly see the pilot being pretty much okay, so I guess the safety devices on this prototype plane are really good. And fun fact, we hear Mel Blanc here saying only one line, which is him saying, could be. I wonder if they lifted that up from the Wild Hare. It pretty much sounds like the way he said it in Wild Hare. It comes from Artie Orbach, as he does the character Mr. Kitzel, who would say, could be, and they would definitely use that in a lot of shorts around this time.
Could be. Could be.
And we end right there. Look, for me, this short is definitely more impressive in terms of how it looks, especially in this brand new restoration, despite the whole thing of what they've done in the beginning with what appears to be the photoshopping. But aside from that, I've never seen this cartoon look so good, and you can see even a lot of the brush strokes in the background as well. I just hope when it is released on physical media, any issues get addressed. But is it funny? Honestly, it is. Yes, I've seen a lot of these gags before. Yes, some of them are pretty lame jokes, some of them are really groan-inducing dad jokes. Whatever. I still enjoyed this one. It's not Avery's finest spot gag short or short period. It's not going to be a go-to one for me, and it definitely does come across as Avery wanting to do something quick, maybe to stay on schedule or whatever. This one gets 8 out of 10. It's fine. It has that one unfortunate joke, but otherwise, you could do worse than this one, believe me. And you can also see that Avery slowly evolving from the Avery at Warner Brothers to what he would do over at MGM once he heads on over. But let me know what you think in the comments below and which gags you liked in this one. But that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.
What happened? He crashed. This is terrible. Is he hurt? Is he killed? Is he killed? Is he?
Could be.